so much for coming, and we're looking forward to Grant's second lecture on the Gothic Cathedral. This time it will be on Saint Denis and Notre-Dame de Leon, Grant Hildebrand.
Thanks, Aaron. I put this up. Are you hearing me? Is it coming through? Yes. Okay. I put this up sort of for the fun of it. Hildebrand did all the sculptural work at the church at Autun, and a good bit else, Vézelay, other sites, and I always have enjoyed his sculptural work. This is the angel telling the three wise men to get up. There's a star in the sky. And he's not relying on ESP. He's tickling one of the three in the bed, and that person's opened his eyes. He's saying, what's going on here? I've always so enjoyed the literalness of this work. Well, onward. Next image. Next image. Yeah, there should be one of the Colosseum in there. No, nothing. We've got... Did you put in the small?
Yes. Or am I on the wrong one? Or is that the first one?
This case, Albertus. Well, this is Saint Etienne at Cannes that we talked about last time, and I used it just to introduce the six-part vault as a way of handling the vaulting problems of getting light and at the same time a stable structure, the vaulting system. Next image. And Durham. We talked a bit about Durham, and I thought we'd just remind ourselves of it because it's such an important and a wonderful building. Next image. Sitting on the banks of the River Wear in this peninsula. Next image. Oopsie, what's happening? There we go. Yeah. And the next, please. This section, I thought I had made a mistake in including this, and I had. My vision had fooled me. I thought this was the section with the full arch at the sides rather than the interdependent half arch, but I find there was no such section, and my memory fails me. But we talked about the interdependence of these of this system, and that the half arches there that lean up against the vaulting cannot stand alone, nor can the vaulting. They depend on one another. Next image, please. Yeah. And I told you that I would bring in, next image, a detail of these columns so that you could see more clearly what I was talking about when I talked about the melding of the ornamentation. Next image. Yes, and the next. Yeah, perhaps here you can see more clearly. If you look closely, you see that the ornamentation between one block and the next has sometimes been smoothed out a bit where it didn't quite meet. And this, of course, is our evidence of prefabrication, the parts made in the lodge and assembled but not fabricated on site. Next image. And I wanted to cite for you a plaque that's in the cloisters at Durham, and if Henry Matthews is here, he may wish to correct my memory. This is from memory, and I'm not sure it's exactly accurate, but it is, as near as I can remember it. Remember, in these cloisters that were finished in his time, John Washington, dean of this cathedral, whose name has won an everlasting fame in lands to him unknown. It seemed appropriate that we put that into our record of our talks.
I agree.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, next image. This is Saint Denis, Saint Denis. He was martyred, beheaded on the bit of Paris that now is called Montmartre, the Martyrs' Hill. He was a tough hombre. He carried his head 6 miles to the site of the present building. And if you believe that, but such is the legend. He carried his head, and you see here he has his head nicely looking forward, watching where he's going. The saint is the patron saint of France. He was martyred in about the year 250, and a church eventually was set up, of course, where he decided to put his head down and call it a day. And that became the burial church for French kings from the time of Clovis onward. The tombs of those kings are there to be seen, and they're, as you might guess, they're a tourist attraction, one of the things the site is known for. It prospered. It went under a number of building campaigns, enlarging it, of course, each time, the building itself, until about 1130, when a new abbot came in place, whose name I pronounce as Suger. It may have been Suger. I understand from my French linguist friends that the final consonant was dropped over time and may have been still used in those earlier days. So I call him Suger. Let's agree on that, and he's our man. He was a remarkable figure. Tremendous ego. He thought the world of himself, but he had every right to do so. He was regent of France in the king's absence. A brilliant man, recognized as such in his own time and since. And he, next slide.
Sorry.
Next image, yeah, no, yes, there we go. Yeah, and he built the two ends of the church that we now have there. He began in about 1135 the west front, and I'll be calling these entry facades the west front from here on because, as we said, these buildings are a kind of compass on their site. The west front, and he carried this to, next image. Can you, yeah, no, let's try one more. I'm not getting, no, there's one in there that has both towers. Let's back up. It's a drawing, not a, where is it, next? No, no, back.
I don't have that one, or it's not.
Back one. Back one, no. Well, I can't. That's it. Is it? Can you blow that up? I think that's it. Is it? No, that's not. I had one in there, and I'm sorry to miss it, that showed both towers in place with a spire on the left or north tower. That was in place for quite some time. It was taken down in 1840, and we are left with this asymmetric composition. The architect, the master mason for this, is thought to have come from the military, and this may help to explain that jagged balustrade up top where he has built in a kind of military cornice. This is going to be a very typical composition, 3 portals, in this case indicating the 3 aisles of the interior, the central one featured, of course, and with a rose window above. This is going to be quite a canonical composition right the way through our course in England as well as France. Next image. And I've told you he was an egotistical man, our Suger. He was indeed. He is in all the sculptural stuff and all the glass all over this building. And here you can perhaps see him kneeling at the feet of our Christ in Judgment, just left of the Christ figure. That's Suger, and you'll find him in roughly that position throughout every ornamentation of the building. He wanted himself known, and as I said, he had every right to his pride. Next image. Yeah. This is the interior now, and it's not what Suger did. This is work from, if you go there, and or if you remember it, this is work from a century later. This is about 1250, the late stages of the Gothic, and we'll be turning to it late in our lecture series, but I show it to you now just to bring us over to the important part of the composition, which is that little ring of chapels way down at the bottom of this image. Not much to be seen. They look like little tiny things, but they are some of the most important architecture in France. Next image. Yes, this is an overall slide of Saint-Denis. As you see, it was built in part on old foundations, and this again is going to be a story that will pervade much of our talks. When you're building, you need money, and you turn to donors, and they don't like to build stuff that won't be seen, all that stuff underground. So we try to use, the mason tries to use existing foundations time and again. And way up high, their work can't be seen. So as the work approaches completion, you find donors are harder to come by. And none of these buildings was ever fully completed. Only Chartres has the complete west towers, or did have until the destruction of the north one late in the day. Notre-Dame, Paris, that you're familiar with, was to have had, I think, 4 spires. It has only the 2 tower bases. They were to have risen in spires far higher than what we have. And this is true of Reims and of almost all of the cathedrals, with the exception of Chartres. Next image. This is what Suger did. The west front here in black, and he, exactly 1140, he had a new mason on that job, and he immediately turned that mason to doing the east end. I think he must have seen in that master mason a talent or an ability that was convincing to him, because he put great importance in that east front. It became, east set of chapels, it became a very important piece of architecture, and I think he saw talent and put it to work there at the east end. Next image. And this is that ring of chapels. There are a lot of them, as you see. I think this is unique in having 9. 7 is the more typical. There's small chapels. No, let's stay on that slide. Let's not go ahead. No, back to the plan. There you are. No, just the chapels. That, and can you blow that up? You had it blown up. There we are. Okay, stay on that. As you see, they come round the east end to form that ring, and there's a double, what we call ambulatory, that walking space around the chapels. There is an inner ambulatory, and then the columns, and then the outer wall. This is quite a complicated plan, as you can see, and doing it with a round arch, I think you can imagine, would be rather a nightmare. But this is where we get that cutting edge idea. So that is the plan of what this mason did. And let's turn to its actuality as we see it. Next image, please. Yes, and let's blow that one up, it deserves it. Can we? There we go, yeah. This is the beginnings of the Gothic. June of 1144, this was consecrated. And you can see here that it is not, we're not in the Romanesque anymore. It's a lot of glass, a lot of line, not much wall or mass. It's become an architecture of points of support with glass between. Suger is again all over the place. The one on the right is the one that you can see most clearly, and there is Suger down at the bottom pleading some kind of case. He had to plead a case to get this far. His rival in fame and influence was Bernard, Saint Bernard of Cluny, and of Citeaux. And Bernard objected to all this flamboyance. Bernard was an ascetic. No delight, no ornament, no sensory elaboration. It distracts the mind from its true purpose, was Bernard's position. And Suger had to argue his case for this quite pretty design. And he finally said to Bernard, "I was praying the other day because I share your view that the ascetic would be the best thing. But Denis himself stepped down from the altar and told me," yes indeed, a nice piece of PR, isn't it? "Stepped down from the altar and told me that whether I wished it or not, he wanted the elaboration that I have executed." This put Bernard in an impossible position, and he gave up. So it happens. You can see here the dissolution of the wall in favor of the glass. And to vault this, to support it, next image.
Sorry.
Next image, just the next one. There we are, yeah. You see that he has used this rib vaulting system with pointed arches that has allowed him enormous flexibility. These 5-part vault chambers are a complication of vault challenge that he has answered by using the pointed arch consistently to make this armature of ribs that runs around, as you see, both ambulatories, the inner and the outer. We might see it as just that. What the mason himself thought about it, we don't know, nor what the scholastic movement thought of it. But it's easy, I think, to see, for me, that this is the unity, the order that can accept and subsume and welcome ultimate variety. The search for that ecosystem, if you like, that occupies us to this day. Order and complexity, or complex order. This was consecrated in June of 1144, and Suger asked every bishop in France, with one exception, he forgot one, every bishop in France and the Archbishop of Canterbury to come to the consecration, and they all did. He lists them all. He wrote 2 books about this project, and he lists all of his bishops except one that he forgot. And in case you missed the point, 2 pages later he lists them all again and throws in Cambrai that he had missed the first time around. He wants you to know that everybody came to this, as well they might. It's, after all, the burial place of those French kings. And they were impressed, there's no doubt of it. Within a century, all would build in this style throughout France, and it very soon would spread to England because of the Archbishop of Canterbury's presence. So they all came, and Suger, in his book, details the way in which it was built. He claims for himself the discovery of a badly needed large timber from his royal forests. He says not one word about the master mason who did this, not a word. One author thinks that that is shameful. I do, and Miriam certainly did, because we embarked on a search to find this man. I had spent the summer of 1980 in Chartres with an architect named John James, who had devised a way of discovering the different teams, the masons' teams who built these buildings. It's an up-close method. Photographs are useless, plans are useless. You have to look at the moldings and the foot measures and the ways of handling windowsills, all that sort of thing, to tell one team from another. But John devised the way to do it, and I was there with him that summer when we did. And Miriam was furious about Suger's omission of his master mason, and we decided that using that methodology, we would set out on a sabbatical in 1988 to try to find what else this man had done. We did. We decided we'd take a 50-mile radius from Paris. You can't cover all of France, there's no way we're going to do that. But we thought, typically these master masons work within a tight locality. We thought 50-mile radius would be adequate. We found every 12th century site in that radius. There were 213, and we went to them all. And we found six buildings that we thought were by this man. We had to expect that they were there because for the burial place of the French kings and Abbot Suger and all the rest of it, they aren't going to be bringing in a man who has no record. They'll be hiring someone who has an accomplished dossier of achievements. And by the same token, after having done this very important job seen by all the bishops in France, this master mason is not going to be going without work. So we were quite sure that we'd find something, and we found 6 sites that we thought were by this man. I was chairing at the time a doctoral dissertation, and the student wanted to take this on. He was fluent in French, which I am not, and in Latin, which I am not. And he took it on, and he derived a number of observations from his work. One of the things he discovered, or we discovered, was that this master mason always makes his windows the same width, the same breadth. And this means that the smaller the chapel, the more of it is taken up by window. Next image. And the chapels at Saint Denis are tiny. The 9 means that they're packed in there. Next image. Let's blow that up if you can. Yeah, they're very small. And so the window, made in his usual breadth of dimension, fills the space pretty much. This means that the glass, the prominent glass, is our master mason's device and not Suger's. And we have to assume that that vaulting is by our master mason, because that obviously is not the work of an amateur, and in architecture Suger was that. Next image. Next. Yeah, let's go to the next one. No, I put in too many, didn't I? And the next. So, we have here then the first Gothic architecture, not a cathedral, an abbey church. It is now a cathedral. It became a cathedral in 1966 when a new bishopric was added in for this region. But this is the beginning, and as you see, it sets out a new set of characteristics. The glass, the expanse of the glass, the vaulting, the armature of the vaulting, and we are on our way. Next image. No, sorry. What I want, I think, is the next flash drive. This is long. It's one syllable pronunciation, long. L-A-O-N. And this had been the Carolingian capital before the year 1000, when Hugh Capet established the capital in Paris. That was good reasoning. It was an ancient Roman city, which I think Laon was not. Moved the capital to Paris, but this had been the capital, and in 1155, shortly after, 11 years after the completion of Saint Denis, this cathedral had been begun by its bishop. It sits on a kind of mesa, an elevated platform high above the Champagne. This is north of Reims by about 30 miles, if I'm remembering it correctly, northwest of Reims in the Champagne, the north of the Champagne region, Champagne region. It sits on this mesa. Next slide. Perhaps you can see here at upper right the lower part of the town, and this will give you perhaps a sense of the elevation of the church itself. Next image. Yeah. I love this building, and I'll tell you why. Next image. This is the hillside that you can see the towers of the cathedral rising above, and the land plummeting away down to the right. We're looking here also at one of the inventions of this age, the cathedral school. That is this part of the site, and this, of course, was the era of the founding of the University of Bologna, and at Paris and Oxford, and ultimately, of course, Cambridge somewhat later. The beginnings of a higher education system in Europe. It had to be. The feudal system of barter and exchange in kind was no longer useful in this increasingly urban era, and the universities established themselves first in law and shortly after in medicine. And the lodges, which I haven't talked much about, would have been the training ground for the master masons, and that training would have been just about as organized as the training in law or medicine. One was apprenticed at an early age and went through a long period of training, not just in laying blocks one on another, but in mathematics. You remember the function of the blocks at Durham, that they had to close and had to be a function of the circumference of the column. That sort of thing, the keeping of records to account for labor costs, the management of the access to the quarries and the quarrying process. All this would have been taught in the lodges over a lengthy period of apprenticeship, until finally the mason would emerge either as one of a team or as the master. So here, the cathedral school on the hillside and the cathedral above. We climb the hill. Next image. I had one in there. There should be one before this. Yes. No? No. All right, we'll settle for that one. Okay. Yeah. I have to go back one, Risa. There's one in there that I really wanted to have, and I can't think where. There, that was it. That's it. Yeah. The parvis, the little space in front of the cathedral's facade, is small, and one is rather crowded in. The slide that I'm going to show you next, but don't put it on just yet, is taken with an extreme wide angle because of the tight dimension that we work with. But this is long, the west facade obviously, and next image. No. No. There we are, yeah. The facade of Laon. You see the pattern again of the three portals surmounted by the rose. Why the rose? It crops up all the time, and I suppose it has to do with Mary's symbol. This is Notre-Dame, Our Lady, and so many of them will be, right up to the time of Beauvais, Our Lady of Long. So the rose and the citadels, and then it rises into those towers. You remember Durham? I think the next image should be Durham. Let's see. No, it's not. Go back one. No, let's go back. There, okay. You remember Durham? You can sort of imagine wiping your hand across the west front. Here you're going to get scratched. Where is the wall plane? The complexity and the order here, once again, an extremely complex but also highly ordered composition, and crowned by, next image, next, these towers with their oxen. These are unique to Long. Next image. Next image. Next image. There. Yeah. And if you'll pardon me, I'm going to read this poem I did long ago. 8 centuries ago it was that weary teams of oxen pulling tumbrils laden deep with stone from which arose the great cathedral trod the paths that climbed vertiginously from the quarries to the Col de Long. Many oxen perished on the paths, and legend tells us that at their demise the Virgin sent celestial surrogates into the oaks. The noble figures in the towers of Notre-Dame de Long, the legend says, commemorate the miracle. But why, we ask, did Mary, in her mercy, not bestow upon the living creatures stamina sufficient to their struggle, saving thus God's gentle ruminants from wretched death and owners of the ruminants from ruin? We will hope then that these lithic oxen, resting in the towers of Long, unyoked, unburdened, are the medieval masons' tribute to those worldly teams whose weary toil enabled the cathedral and the call. You look at the face of the oxen. This is an adept sculptor, isn't it? This is not hacker work. It testifies, I think, to the ability of, this would have been one of the master masons' lodge, perhaps even apprentices, who has yielded this, I think, very accomplished piece of sculptural work. I love them. But you see, too, that this is a composition. Let's go back one, if we may. Can we back up? Yes, that's fine. This is a composition of diagonals. The corner turrets that turn through 45 degrees to project outward at that angle, and in so doing buttress both of the faces of the tower proper. And then we get the octagon of the oxen, and then they turn their heads back at 45 degrees to hold true to the geometry that pervades the different stories. Next image. Yeah, and the next. Right. I think I was going to talk about this plan, but it's rather faint. Let's go on to the next one. Yeah. The plan of Long. You see at the right that the church ends not in the way that Saint Denis did at all. It has a flat eastern end, and that was not the original design. The original had a half circle plan at the east end, as did Saint Denis, and the design was changed, I think, before it was completed. But I raise the point because it testifies to an attention to detail. The column bases, where it was to have been curved, are themselves curved to follow the arc of the plan, an echoing in detail of the overall geometry, and I suppose we would say again a unity that pervades the variety. That has changed, as you see, to this unique flat east end. Next image. Yeah, here we look at that east end. There are flying buttresses here, but they are not original. They are put in almost, I think, as decoration. This was built without them. The buttressing of the vaulting happens through the substructure of the citadels without the flyers. But you see here the rows of the east end. And if you look toward the right, the little semicircular chapel built according to what had been the plan for the larger scheme, the little semicircular chapel there on the transept, and another of those wonderful towers. Next image. Yeah, this is the six-part plan. We're still kind of stuck with that, aren't we? At Durham, we saw the four-part plan. It's a device, and we wonder why they stayed with the six-part. There must have been a confidence in that straight-across rib as a kind of propping device, which the four-part vault doesn't have. I would sense that must have been felt as a sturdier way of doing it. I don't think it is, but I think that may have been the thought. And then we go, and you see here also the four-part nave wall. There's the lower part of the nave arcade, and then above it a gallery, and then a kind of tribune sort of thing, and finally the clerestory, which is what we call that upper range of windows. And let's look now at the next image. Oh, this is looking up at the vaulting. No, we want the vaulting. There we go, yeah. This is looking up at the vaulting. Can we blow that one up? Can you enlarge that? No, yes, no. Can you enlarge that? No. Well, there you go. Well, we're looking here straight up now at the six-part vault, and you see that nave elevation. And we are here looking up at the gallery. The nave arcade is below the camera, below the image. The six-part vaulting, the classic six-part system, with the clerestory, still here rather small. We're going to see the growth of that, not at Paris, but at Chartres. The clerestory at Chartres will have 6 times the glass of these windows. Right, and let's go now to the next image. Yeah. The choir and the rose at the east end. This rose has a geometry that in different permutations is going to be very typical. 12 units around the center, which is an easy thing to do geometrically, and of course can be associated with the 12 apostles. Round arches still present in the rows, and leading of course to that central rose. They love this geometry, and you can see why it crowns every clerestory at Chartres of the Rose. So that takes us to the origins of the Gothic and to its first cathedral. And next image, please. And so this is the launching of this new style. Different from the Romanesque in its mood, its feeling, its geometry, its use of light. Next time round, next image, we're going to Paris. And a complicated history of that building. It's been so much in the news lately. And now I'm glad to discuss things. What would you like to talk about? All was crystal clear. No.
So Grant, what was the name of the mason who was so ingenious in building these that you discovered?
What was his name? I have no idea. We don't know at all. I don't know if I've talked you through this before. It was customary to put a plaque in the middle of the floor citing the masters who did the cathedrals, and some people think of them as anonymous. They were there to be walked over every time that anyone went through the church. They were as famous as one could imagine. Would the present-day architects achieve that degree of tribute and fame? But many of those are lost. Unfortunately, they're lost at Chartres, and they're lost at Saint Denis. If Suger ever put one in, I suspect he may not have, or he may have put his own name in it. I don't know. But no, we have no way of knowing that man's name. I'm sorry to say. You know, there were no other indications in the buildings we identified. Sorry about that. No.
Any questions over here?
You mentioned last week that Durham was originally much more complicated on its exterior building,
Yes.
and that was taken off. Can you tell me when that happened and why?
I can tell you roughly. I don't have the date exactly at hand. It was the mid 1800s, I think, when a project was embarked upon to so-called restore Durham, and I guess it was believed that the ornamentation was extraneous. They tore down the entire east end of Durham and put in a transverse series of chapels that changed the east end of it completely. And again, I don't know why. I think it was a very misguided attempt to, I don't know what. It's hard to describe. Is Henry Matthews here? Maybe he knows more about that than I do. Henry, are you here? No. Yeah.
I've got one over here. Grant, over here.
Yes?
Grant was the roofing, mostly slate.
Was the roofing slate? It depends a great deal. Much of it is copper. Chartres is copper, which is the green patina that it takes over as it weathers. I don't know exactly the others. Slate would have been used more in the smaller buildings. Its weight mitigates against its use in huge expanses. It's heavy stuff, unlike copper. The wood structure itself, as we know at Notre-Dame, was wood, and the copper was laid over the wood typically. You know.
Yes, Ruskin and John Ruskin and William Morris regarded restoration as the worst destruction that could ever happen to architecture. I didn't have the quotation exactly word for word, but the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings in England was protecting them from restoration.
Yes, I believe you. He called that lamp of memory, that a building recorded its own history, and he felt that one of the things that was lost in restoration was its role in the lamp of memory. If I'm remembering it correctly, he wrote a book called The Seven Lamps, and memory was one of them, and a good one. I showed you last time those stairs at Wells, restoration of which would be a crime. You know.
Over here.
Grant,
Yes.
What type of stone was used to build the cathedrals?
What type of stone? Local, almost invariably local. So the stone varies from site to site. Chester is largely a red sandstone that hasn't weathered well. Generally, as a general rule, limestone, a local limestone. I can't think offhand of exceptions other than Chester. York, lovely though it is largely wood. Much of the, well, all the vaulting is wood, but typically a limestone from a nearby quarry. They've been looking for the quarry at Notre-Dame, haven't they? That's been part of their search to get the same stone. Yeah. And I commented about its ease of workmanship. The instance that I cited as sawing through it as easily as wood was at that was at Lincoln. Yeah.
Grant, was the development from
Over there, Grant.
was the development from the Romanesque to the Gothic purely an architectural development, or did cultural context play any important role in the development from the original cathedrals, which were quite small, to the Gothic ones?
Yeah, that's a really nice question. I've talked about the rise of scholasticism. Am I being?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm on. Yeah, I talked about the rise of scholasticism and the rise of the cathedral schools and the growth of the universities. It was a time, I think, of fascinating intellectual growth in Europe. I'm going to talk later, but, well, I'll talk now about the growth of polyphonic music, which was a development of this time. These masonry vaulted spaces are unique to the Western world until a very late date. And they are a spin-off of our Roman heritage. The Romans built vast vaulted spaces, and the Gothic and the Romanesque are a development of the Roman work. And those masonry spaces will hold a note. I sent a student once to measure the reverberation time, 9 seconds at Paris. And this means, of course, that a Cluniac chant, ta-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, is going to hold those notes and make a polyphonic experience just by its very existence. And that, I think, is where architecture and music come together. Leonin and Perotin at Paris wrote the first of the polyphonic scores, and you don't find it in Japan, China. No, it's a Roman architectural heritage that becomes polyphonic music, I believe. How did I get off on that? That wasn't your question. Yeah.
You know, I'm fascinated by the interior of the cathedrals, you know, way up high, very intricate. How did they get up there? They didn't have, you know, the machines now that will kind of boost you way up. Did they use ladders or what?
Ladders, cranes. They built the roof structure first. They took the walls up to their height, braced by bracing, and then built the roof across the top of the walls. The roof then became the working platform to build the vaults below. You might think it was the other way around, but not. And the roof structure then, they mounted what they called the great wheel as a kind of large-scale pulley to bring up the, you pull the outside and the inner gives you the leverage, to pull up the masonry for the vaulting. And now I've forgotten what you asked me. What did you want to know? How they, what did you ask me? You want to know the building process, yeah. Yeah, so they're built with from the roof down, really, the masonry structure, yeah.
Well, maybe you answered my question. I mean, the interior is so high up.
Oh, the
How
height.
do you get up to
Yes,
there?
you asked about the height. Yeah, I can show you at Chartres doors that lead to nowhere, that are up in the middle of buttresses, and you think, what's that door doing up there? It's an access door from scaffolding that would have been built to that level. And this sort of thing happens throughout. They use scaffolding, ladders, and cranes and the great wheel to bring material up. I'll tell you as a kind of preamble, giving away the storyline, Long is 65 feet to the keystone in the vaults. That's about 7 modern stories. Paris is 110. Yeah, that's a big jump. Chartres is 120, Reims is 125, and Amiens is 141. And Beauvais is 165. They're going tremendously high, and I could tell you in detail how they built them, but in the end, I too say, how did they do it? You know, we'll talk about that more when we get to Reims and Amiens. Amiens is a delightful case. You look at the plan and it's just a bunch of little tiny dots. And all the forces are brought down within the middle third of those little tiny dots. And it's quite astonishing. Yeah. Yes.
Was the stained glass at St. Denis?
Sure, yeah, that's, I don't mind at all. Yeah, excuse me, what?
The medallions in St. Denis, chevet, were those later? The stained glass,
I'm
those
sorry,
medallions?
I missed your first part of your question. What did you ask?
The St. Denis
Yes.
chevet, the medallion stained glass, was that done originally or was that later?
The stained glass?
Yes.
Oh, that's all original. That's Suger's Pride and Joy. Yes, indeed.
It was
Yeah.
done that early, before Sharp.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Half century before Chartres. More than that, yeah. Yes.
Curtis?
We-
Curtis?
we can
Yeah,
take-
I'm coming.
we can take as
I
many
see her.
pictures As we like. That's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm doing. Yeah. Artists.
I'm
Oh.
coming, I'm coming.
Oh, all right. There you go. Okay. There we go. Yeah. Hi.
Talking about the engineering, the way of building it, there's a book by Ross King called Brunelleschi's Dome.
Oh, that is a wonderful book. She's citing Brunelleschi's Dome by Ross King. It's a marvelous book.
It's about the building of the Duomo in Florence.
Yeah, the dome.
And
Yes.
at the time, that was the biggest span, I
It
guess,
was.
in the world. But he
It was
talks,
1 foot greater than the Pantheon.
yeah, he talks a lot about
Yeah.
kind of engineering,
Yes,
the kind of
yes.
machines that Brunelleschi developed to build that and raise all the materials.
Thank you for bringing that up. That is a wonderful book. I thought until that came out, I thought I knew a lot about Brunelleschi's Dome, and that taught me 10 times what I knew. It's a wonderful book. Yeah, exactly. Brunelleschi's Dome. Yeah.
With that, or?
No, let's take a couple more.
Okay.
If they'd like.
Couple more
That's fine.
questions?
Sure, that's fine. Yeah. I don't mind at all. That's fine.
Here's one.
Talking about the materials that are put into these compositions, glass is very important to Gothic architecture. The technology of glass, the manufacture of glass. There, can you hear me?
Pointed at your
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
The importance of glass in Gothic architecture. Was the manufacture and the science behind glass precede Gothic, or was it developed after Gothic? Which generated first?
Oh, the glass, the ability to do the glass.
Yeah.
The ability to do the glass was in place by Suger's time, no question. That's exactly what where that came from. But they did some wonderful things that we haven't done since. Glass is connected one piece to another by what's called a came, and it's an H-shaped piece that you slide both pieces of glass into the thing, and it holds the two pieces. At Bourges, which is the most, my hand is cramping. At Bourges, which is the most advanced of all the glass, they do the came as a displaced H, and one of the openings much thicker than the other, so the eye can't quite focus. It's looking at two planes at two slightly different distances, and that glass is astonishing. It's absolutely amazing. I hope to be able to show you that when the time comes. But yes, glass was, obviously the glass industry was a going thing by the time of Suger.
Was glass local?
Was glass local? I don't know, but I imagine so. Almost everything was within a 20 or 30 mile radius. All the architects we know at Reims were within 20 miles. No. The North Tower at Chartres was a local man. No.
Over here.
Grant, is it safe to say that the cathedrals were basically ego trips?
Is it safe? I don't quite know where to go with that one.
I mean, who started the cathedrals? Whose idea was, let's build a big
Whose idea was it to build them? Yeah, there's an element of that. We're going to see at Paris next week that Paris was outdistanced by far by Chartres, and it underwent a major remodeling in order to try to keep up. And in that sense, yes, there was a civic ego involved, no question. At Suger, it was personal, I think. He wanted to do it to show himself off, and good for him. But yeah, yes, there was that element to it. I think Amiens was begun to compete with France. You know, there's an element of that in it, I think. What do you think? Are there other? Is that
it? Okay.
Thank you so much, Grant, and we'll look forward to next week.